It began with the scent of burned silk and blood. The stone walls had absorbed centuries of secrets, but some could still be heard. You stood very still. Somewhere, beneath the clatter of servants and the rustle of courtly robes, there was a different sound. The distant scrape of metal against flesh. A muffled scream that never reached the courtyard. And the flicker of torchlight along narrow corridors where no visitors were allowed. This was not the grandeur of the emperors hall or the elegance of the tea gardens. This was the other side of the empire. The side they buried, hidden beneath the imperial citadel of the 15th century. Tran Dynasty in Vietnam was a place few dared whisper about. Long Hinh, the Hall of Forms. Officially, it was a disciplinary court. Unofficially, it was something far worse, a psychological crucible, designed not just to punish rebellion, but to unmake human beings. Their bodies, their minds. Their loyalty. At the heart of Lang Hinh was a man whose name survives only in fragment, Stern Kaken HD, a former general turned interrogator. His name appears briefly in court annals as a man who restored order, but the truth was darker than ink could bear. Didi had seen the collapse of dynasties. He knew that torture, when applied with calculation not rage, was a form of governance. And he perfected it behind locked doors. Prisoners were not led in chains, but in silence, heads bowed. Their robes stripped of insignia. Their identities erased before the pain began. One such prisoner was Nguyen Van Quang, a former advisor to the emperor and secret opponent of the brutal salt tax policy that Nguyen had caused mass starvation across the countryside. Quang was not a rebel, but he had dared to write a letter, just one, questioning the emperor's new minister of finance. That was enough. That was always enough. He was taken at night. His family never saw him again. The guards bound him not with rope, but with silk cords soaked in salt water, softer, quieter, but burning like fire, once tightened. He was blindfolded, not for mercy, but to disorient. The interrogators at Lang Hinh had learned this from ancient Chinese manuals, from Mongol techniques, even from Persian methods smuggled eastward through traders. What they practiced was not crude violence, it was systematic erasure, psychological warfare with centuries of evolution. The room Quang was led into had no windows. The floor was lined with pressed rattan mats designed to absorb blood and urine without staining. Hooks on the walls, iron masks on shelves, and small copper bowls of boiling oil waited like silent observers. But what disturbed most prisoners wasn't the tools. It was the silence. The way the interrogators spoke calmly, even kindly, as they broke bones, peeled skin, or suspended men upside down for hours until their lungs collapsed. Quang survived for 3 days. He confessed to treason he didn't commit. Then he recanted. Then he begged. By the time they found his body, he was still breathing, but barely. His heart stopped just as they began preparing him for public display. But this story isn't about him. The most horrifying thing about Lang Hinh was that it wasn't secret. It was ritualized, codified, and documented in elegant calligraphy. Every scream had a scribe. Every confession had a clerk. Every execution had a ceremony. And behind it all, the emperor smiled. Emperor turned Nat L, crowned at the age of 17, was known for his gentle voice and beautiful handwriting. He was also, in private, obsessed with purification, not of the soul, of loyalty. He believed treachery was a disease and that it could be cured through suffering. Fear makes obedience holy. He once wrote in his private journal, one of the few documents that survived the fire that consumed much of the palace 2 centuries. Later, Lai's reign was plagued by paranoia. After a failed coup attempt by his cousin, an event never acknowledged in official records, he created the Office of Clarification, a euphemism for a network of spies and torturers whose sole job was to extract confessions, even if none existed. The tortured became informants. The informants became prisoners. And the wheel kept turning. What happened inside Lang Hinh was more than physical destruction, was psychological reassembly. Victims were not merely broken, they were reshaped. Some were forced to participate in the torture of others, sometimes even family. In one infamous case, a court musician named Tao Thi Lin was ordered to perform lullabies during executions. She later claimed in a confession that the screams eventually harmonized with her songs. She was executed, too. But not before she wrote. A melody that is still sung in Vietnamese funeral rites today. Most don't know where it came from. But it came from here. Lang Hinh was never drawn on maps. But everyone in the Imperial court knew of it. They passed it in the hallways, eyes down. They smelled the iron and incense. They heard things at night, whispers, chants, sometimes laughter, but no one ever intervened, because what came next will shock you. It was a child who changed everything in the spring of 1387. A 10-year-old page named La Beau Kim witnessed something he was never meant to see. While delivering scrolls to the southern wing of the palace, he took a wrong turn and entered a corridor guarded by no one. What he saw was a man skin flayed to the bone, dragging himself across the floor toward a candle, muttering words over and over, not prayers. Names of every person who had betrayed him. The boy ran. He told no one for 3 years. What he saw haunted him. At 15, Kim would rise quickly through the ranks. A favorite of the Empress Dowager, he became a scribe, then a royal aide. But his mission was always the same: get close to the truth, find who ran Lang Hinh, document it, destroy it. But this wasn't a fairy tale. Kim did not live long. He was discovered, tortured, and executed without trial. But he left behind one thing: a hidden scroll, now preserved in fragments at the National Library of Vietnam. It is the only surviving first-hand account of what happened inside the torture palace. In it, Kim writes, "They say the empire must be protected from enemies. But I have seen where the true enemy lives. It is not in rebellion. It is in obedience. It is in the chamber where silence screams the loudest." The scroll was banned. For centuries, its pages were smeared with wax and ash to keep it unreadable. But it survived. And what historians later discovered was worse than anyone imagined. Lang Hinh wasn't just a place of punishment. It was a laboratory, a space for experimentation. Prisoners weren't always guilty. They were chosen for their differences. Dissidents, artists, women with ambitions. Beyond marriage, eunuchs who dared speak freely. Monks who questioned court rituals. One by one, they were brought in. And what happened next twisted the very fabric of imperial politics for decades. But there was one more secret. Buried deeper. One room even the scribes didn't enter. And what was found inside that room still terrifies scholars today. Deep beneath the eastern wing of Lang Hinh, behind a false wall disguised with lacquered panels, was a door with no handle. It opened only from the inside, when the palace was finally seized by rebel forces in 1400. Long after the Tran dynasty had collapsed, this chamber was discovered by accident, as looters tore through the ruins in search of jade or gold. What they found instead was a stone stairwell descending into darkness, sealed for nearly 2 decades. The air was fetid. The walls were covered in soot, and at the bottom there were 13 wooden chairs, each bolted to the floor, facing inward. In a circle, each chair had iron shackles affixed to the arms and legs. At the center of the circle, a small bronze brazier still held the ashes of something long burned. But the walls were the most disturbing. Carved into every surface, every inch of stone, were symbols. Some resembled ancient Vietnamese ideograms, others matched no known language. They spiraled inwards, toward the center, like a ritual. At first, historians believed they were marks of insanity graffiti scrawled by prisoners over years of confinement. But later analysis revealed something far more unsettling. The inscriptions weren't random. They were records. Each set of symbols corresponded to a specific prisoner. Their names, their roles in court, their transgressions, real or fabricated. Most disturbingly, the methods used to extract their obedience. But these weren't simple lists. They were observations. Behavioral notes, emotional reactions, doodles that mimicked facial expressions, lines that suggested mood swings, breakdowns, even hallucinations. It was a diary written across stone by someone who watched everything. The chamber became known among modern historians as the Room of Mirrors. Not because there were any mirrors, but because of what it revealed about the empire's darkest. Obsession, control of the human mind. One entry described a noblewoman who was forced to live in complete darkness for 73 days. Another detailed a monk who was made to chant scripture while being submerged repeatedly in water laced with hot peppers and ash. The goal was never just pain. It was transformation. And the anonymous author, likely an imperial interrogator or scholar, documented it all with clinical detachment. To this day, no one knows who wrote those inscriptions, but the chilling precision of the records and their preservation in such an isolated chamber suggests a disturbing truth that Lang Hinh had evolved from a torture center into something else, a school, according to a classified set of letters discovered in the early 20th century by French colonial archivists. There is evidence that select members of the Tran court were trained in these methods, initiated through ceremonies and trials held within the Room of Mirrors. Recruits were said to be chosen for their lack of attachments, their willingness to witness suffering without intervention, and their ability to maintain emotional clarity under duress. These letters, now sealed in Vietnam's National Archives and viewed by only a handful of scholars, describe a secret order within the court called the Han Nan, the same eyes. Their role was not merely to enforce loyalty, but to shape it, to sculpt the personalities of nobles, generals, even future emperors. Through trauma and conditioning, and here, the lines between history and horror begin to blur. There is one final account, perhaps the most disturbing of all, involving a child prince known only as Le Dung, taken from his mother at the age of 4 and raised within Lang Hinh as an imperial vessel. He was never seen at court. He had no official record of existence. But 2 decades later, during a violent change of dynasties, a man appeared, calm, eloquent, perfectly composed, and declared himself heir to the throne. His first act as emperor, the reconstruction of Lang Hinh. He ordered new chambers built, expanded the underground system, restored the Room of Mirrors. The man ruled only 7 years. He died without an heir. But some believe he was Le Dung, the child, raised in silence, pain, and shadow. The child who had no mother, no past, and no mercy. A ruler born from the empire's darkest institution. And if that is true, then the torture palace wasn't just a chamber of horrors. It was a factory for kings. What makes this more chilling is how much was deliberately erased. When French colonial forces arrived in the 1800s, they encountered ruins, rumors, and strange inscriptions, but no official records of Lang Hinh existed in Vietnamese annals. It was as if the empire had amputated its own memory. But human suffering leaves traces. In the oral traditions of northern Vietnam, there are lullabies sung to children that carry strange lines. Don't cry too loud. The walls have ears. The smiling man is always near. Sleep soft, child, and don't ask why. Some truths will make your mother die. For generations, no one knew where these words came from, but now, historians believe they were fragment survivals from the legacy of Lang Hinh, passed down in whispers, disguised as song, and the more we uncover, the more it becomes clear. This wasn't a forgotten corner of one dynasty. This was a method, a system, a doctrine. Not just in Vietnam, parallels appear. Across history, the Tower of London, the Spanish Inquisition, the cells of the Khmer Rouge, the basements of Stalinist Russia, all have their own versions of Lang Hin, and in every case, torture isn't just about information, it's about reshaping reality. What comes next, though, may be the most haunting part of all, because Lang Hin may not be gone, it may never have left. It may have changed names, adopted new masks. But in secret cells, in rogue states, in backroom regimes, its methods still echo, and the palace, though crumbled in stone, still stands in spirit. We like to think that history forgets its monsters, that when empires fall, their evils vanish. With them, but Lang Hin reminds us, some systems don't die. They hibernate because power, once fused with fear, is difficult to destroy. It adapts, it survives. And sometimes, it writes lullabies. So the next time you hear about a prison no one can enter, a chamber with no records, or a ruler who smiles too icily, ask yourself, what walls have ears? And who is still listening?